quietest moments, when the world seems to hold its breath, that's when I hear them. Whispers carried on the wind, murmurs that seem to know my name. I didn't always hear them. There was a time when Frost Hollow was just another forest to me. But now I know what waits between the trees. I know why the locals never venture there after dark. And I know why some who enter never return as themselves. Welcome to the OBSCURALORE Vault. I'm your guide through the darkest corners of human experience. Today I bring you the faces in Frost Hollow Forest. A warning I hope you'll heed better than I did. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. My story begins with death, as many do. My uncle Elias passed away last winter, leaving behind a small cabin on the outskirts of a rural town called Milford Creek. I'd only met him twice in my life, a strange, reclusive man with eyes that never seemed to focus on you directly. The family spoke of him in hushed tones, mentioning his eccentricities and scholarly pursuits, with the kind of careful language reserved for topics no one wants to address directly. The inheritance surprised everyone, especially me. I was a struggling writer living in a cramped apartment in the city, desperately seeking inspiration for my next book. The cabin, and the small stipend that came with it, seemed like the perfect opportunity to escape, reflect, and perhaps find my voice again. It was early March when I arrived. Winter's grip was still tight on Milford Creek, the landscape painted in shades of gray and white. The cabin sat at the end of a long, winding dirt road, backed by dense woodland that stretched for miles. Frost Hollow Forest, according to my GPS. The interior of the cabin was exactly what you'd expect. Rustic, functional, with the lingering scent of pipe tobacco and old books. Uncle Elias had been a collector of sorts, his shelves lined with obscure texts on folklore, mythology, and local history. But it was what I found in his study that first started the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. His journal was leather-bound and worn, the pages filled with a handwriting that grew increasingly erratic toward the end. At first, I thought they were notes for a novel, detailed descriptions of rituals, entities, and something he called the thinning. But as I read further, I realized these weren't fiction. Elias believed every word. The faces appear most clearly during the first frost. One entry read, "They press against the barrier, seeking warmth, seeking entry. They remember being human once, I think. Or perhaps they simply remember what it's like to wear humanity like a second skin." Another entry, dated just weeks before his death. "They're getting stronger. The ritual in the town records was incomplete, deliberately so, I suspect. They don't just watch anymore. Last night I felt cold fingers on my cheek as I slept. When I looked in the mirror this morning, there was a pattern of frost on my skin, like delicate handprints. I should have left then, packed my belongings, sold the cabin, and returned to my cramped apartment. But curiosity has always been my weakness, and perhaps something else was already at work, drawing me deeper into Frost Hollow's secrets. Chapter 2. The town knows the local diner in Milford Creek was exactly what you'd expect. Checkered tablecloths, the smell of coffee and pie, and the unmistakable hush that falls when a stranger enters. I took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee, and felt the weight of stares on my back. "You're Elias Winter's nephew," the waitress said. Not a question. I nodded. I inherited his place. She poured my coffee with steady hands, but her eyes betrayed concern. "The cabin by Frost Hollow? You staying there?" "For a while, yes. I'm a writer, looking for some peace and quiet." A few stools down, an older man snorted. "You won't find much peace in that place, son." I learned his name was Harold, the unofficial town historian. Over a second cup of coffee, he told me what the travel brochures didn't, that Milford Creek had a complicated relationship with Frost Hollow Forest. The town was founded in the 1780s by settlers who displaced something older, something that had already claimed that land. "Every town has their stories," Harold said, voice dropping to a near whisper. "But ours come with a body count. People who go too deep into the hollow, especially during what we call the thin times, first frost, midwinter, early thaw, Sometimes they don't come back right. What do you mean, don't come back right? I asked. Harold's weathered face tightened. Sometimes they come back different. Same face, same voice, but something behind the eyes isn't them anymore, like something else is wearing them. I thought of my uncle's journal, the entries about faces in the frost. My uncle studied local folklore, didn't he? The waitress and Harold exchanged looks. Studied isn't the word I'd use, she finally said. Elias went looking for things best left alone, especially that old ritual business from the town's early days. Harold nodded. Town council sealed those records years ago, for good reason. But your uncle, he found ways to access them. Started performing the old rites, backward, mind you, opening doors instead of closing them. Your coffee's on the house, the waitress said firmly. But if you're smart, you'll sell that cabin and head back to wherever you came from. I didn't take their advice. Something about their warnings only fueled my curiosity. That, and the strange dreams that had started my very first night in the cabin. Dreams of faces pressed against glass, watching, waiting. Chapter 3. The first signs. The following days settled into a routine. I'd wake early, make coffee, and work on my novel, a supernatural thriller that now drew heavy inspiration from my uncle's journals and the town's whispered legends. The isolation suited me, and I found my writer's block dissolving like morning mist. But as the temperature dropped and the weatherman predicted the season's first frost, I noticed changes. It started with sounds in the night, scratching at the windows, soft tapping like fingernails on glass. I dismissed it as branches in the wind. Then came the cold spots, pockets of air throughout the cabin that dropped to freezing, regardless of how high I turned the heat. Then the mirrors. I'd catch glimpses of movement in them, never when looking directly, always in peripheral vision. A figure standing behind me, then gone when I turned. Breath fogging the glass when I was alone. I told myself these were manifestations of an overactive imagination, fueled by Uncle Elias's journals and the townsfolk's warnings. But on the night of the first frost, I couldn't deny what I saw. I'd fallen asleep at my desk, notes spread around me, local history, folklore about entities called the Waiting Ones, and Elias's ritual transcriptions. A sudden drop in temperature woke me, my breath immediately visible in the frigid air. The windows were covered in frost, unusual geometric patterns spreading across the glass like ferns. And in those patterns I saw them, faces. Not distinct human features, but suggestions of eyes, mouths, twisted expressions of yearning and hunger pressed into the frost as if trying to push through. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. The faces seemed to follow my movement, turning to track me. And beneath the howl of the wind, I heard voices, countless whispers overlapping in a language I couldn't understand but somehow recognized deep in my bones. I fled to my bedroom, slammed the door, and huddled under blankets like a frightened child. The temperature continued to drop until I could see my breath even there. The whispers persisted until dawn, when the morning sun melted the frost and silenced the voices. I should have left. But when I examined the windows in daylight, they showed no signs of the faces I'd seen. And despite my terror, I felt a familiar pull. The same obsessive curiosity that makes people slow down to observe car wrecks. I needed to know more. So I did what any rational person would do. I drove back into town to access the sealed records Harold had mentioned. Chapter 4. The Sealed Records. The Milford Creek Historical Society occupied a small corner of the local library. The librarian, a middle-aged woman named Meredith, regarded me with open suspicion when I inquired about the town's founding documents. "Those records require special permission," she said. "Town council approval." I mentioned I was Elias Winters's nephew conducting research for a book. Her expression darkened. "Then you should know better than to ask," she replied. "Your uncle caused enough trouble with those old papers." As I turned to leave, defeated, A voice called out to me. A young woman with intelligent eyes and an armful of books introduced herself as Cassie Weber, the town's unofficial archivist and, as luck would have it, someone who had corresponded with my uncle. Over coffee at a nearby cafe, Cassie revealed she had been helping Elias with his research before his death. I didn't agree with what he was doing, she said quietly, but I respected his scholarship. He was convinced the town founders had encountered something ancient in Frost Hollow, something that predated European settlement, predated Native American presence, maybe even predated human existence in this region altogether. Cassie slid a folder across the table. These are copies of some of the documents he was most interested in. I shouldn't be sharing these, but I'm worried about you staying in that cabin. You should know what you're dealing with. The documents detailed the town's troubled founding. The original settlers had arrived in winter, building their homes near what they called the hollow of frost that never thaws. Within months, several colonists vanished. Others reported seeing their missing friends and family members watching them from the forest edge, but somehow wrong, hollow-eyed and expressionless. The settlement's leader, Jeremiah Milford, consulted with a Native American elder who warned that the hollow was a thin place, a point where the barrier between worlds had worn down. The things on the other side, the elder warned, hungered for the warmth and solidity of human form. They wear your loved ones like masks, one account read. They study us, learn to mimic us, but cannot truly become us without invitation or ritual. Jeremiah Milford developed a ritual to strengthen the barrier, a complex ceremony performed at specific points around the hollow during each thin time of the year. The town had maintained this tradition for generations, until modernity and skepticism caused it to fade into mere superstition. Your uncle believed the barrier was weakening, Cassie said. He found evidence that the original ritual wasn't just to keep things out, but to contain something specific, something the founders accidentally brought with them or awakened. He called it the collector in his notes. The collector? I asked. An entity that gathers faces, identities. Elias believed all the missing persons over the years weren't individual incidents, but offerings, fuel for something larger. She hesitated. The ritual wasn't just abandoned, it was deliberately sabotaged in the 1970s by a town council member who thought he could bargain with whatever was in the hollow. Why are you telling me this? I asked, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the cafe's air conditioning. Cassie's eyes met mine, deadly serious. Because the first frost has come and you're living in a cabin at the edge of the hollow. Because the barrier is thinner than it's been in generations. And because your uncle didn't just die, as everyone claims. What do you mean? I whispered. Elias still walks around town sometimes, she said, her voice breaking slightly. But it's not him inside anymore. Whatever's in there recognized me last week. It smiled and said, soon. I think it was a warning. Chapter 5. The Photographs. The drive back to the cabin was tense, my mind racing with everything Cassie had shared. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it all as small-town superstition mixed with grief over my uncle's death. But I couldn't shake the memory of those faces in the frost, the whispers in a language that resonated in my marrow. I pulled into the cabin's driveway just as twilight descended, the forest edge a dark wall of trees made ominous by my new knowledge. For the first time, I truly looked at the positioning of the cabin, how it sat exactly between civilization and the depths of Frost Hollow, as if straddling two worlds. Inside, I went straight to Elias's study, determined to find more concrete evidence before I let myself be swept away by fantastic theories. If what Cassie said was true, there had to be proof. Journals, photographs, recordings, something beyond secondhand accounts and centuries-old town legends. I tore through his desk methodically, finding tax records, correspondence with folklorists, academic rejection letters. Apparently his theories were too outlandish even for fringe journals. In the bottom drawer, Locked but easily forced open, I found what I was looking for. A photo album labeled simply, Evidence. The first pages contained normal enough photographs, the forest in different seasons, landmarks mentioned in local legends, stone formations that could be natural or man-made. But as I progressed deeper into the album, the images grew disturbing. People standing at the forest's edge, photographed from a distance, their faces slightly blurred, but wrong somehow, features misaligned as if their skin was a poorly fitting mask. Close-ups of windows during frost with the same faces I'd seen pressed against the glass. Trail camera images of dark figures moving between trees at night, their proportions subtly inhuman. I jumped at the sound from elsewhere in the cabin, nearly dropping the album. After a moment of frozen panic, I forced myself to investigate, finding only a book that had fallen from a shelf in the living room, my own copy of local history I'd purchased in town. When I returned to the study, the album was open to a new page, one showing my uncle standing in front of the cabin. The photograph was recent, dated just 2 weeks before his supposed death. But his eyes, completely black, reflecting light like polished obsidian, and his smile stretched too wide for a human face. Beneath it, a note in Elias's handwriting. It wears me now. I opened the door too wide. The collector comes. The sudden ring of my phone nearly gave me a heart attack. Cassie's name flashed on the screen. "You need to leave the cabin," she said without preamble, her voice tight with fear. "Now. Tonight. I just saw Elias in town again, asking questions about you. He knows I spoke with you." "Cassie, slow down." "What exactly?" "Listen to me," she interrupted. "Whatever's wearing your uncle is coming for you next. You're connected by blood, which matters to these things. The whole town knows it. Why do you think everyone warned you away?" "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, panic rising. "Anywhere but—" Her voice cut out, replaced by static, and beneath it, those same whispers I'd heard in the frost. When I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. Outside, the temperature was plummeting rapidly. Frost began forming on the windows, intricate patterns spreading inward like questing fingers. My car wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't. I was trapped in the cabin as night fell completely, with only my uncle's disturbing research and the growing knowledge that something was coming for me through the darkness. Chapter 6. The Visitor. I barricaded myself in the study, pushing a heavy bookcase against the door and gathering anything that might serve as a weapon. The rational part of my mind still argued this was an elaborate prank, or that I'd been infected by the town's collective delusion. But deeper instincts, older ones that recognize predators in the dark, knew better. The temperature continued to drop until my breath fogged before me. The windows frosted over completely, those same vague faces pressing against the glass from outside, watching. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, occasionally resolving into English words. Open. Welcome. Join. And then I heard it. Footsteps approaching the cabin, unhurried and deliberate. The porch step creaked. A key turned in the front door lock. Someone, something, had entered the cabin. I heard it moving through the rooms methodically, opening doors, searching. Its footsteps were strange, sometimes shuffling, sometimes precisely measured, as if it was still learning how to walk properly in its stolen body. "Nephew?" The voice was my uncle's, but hollow, like someone reading phonetically from a script without understanding the words. "I've come to check on you. Family should stay close, especially near the hollow." The thing wearing Elias's face tried the study door, found it blocked. It didn't pound or force its way in. It simply waited, silent, on the other side. Somehow that patience was more terrifying than violence would have been. "I know you're afraid," it said, voice closer now, as if it had pressed its mouth against the crack of the door. "But fear is temporary. What we offer lasts forever. The collector has chosen you as it chose me. There is Such vastness waiting, nephew. My breath caught as I saw frost spreading under the door, creating a white line between it and the floor. The temperature dropped further, painful now, numbing my fingers. Your uncle resisted too, the thing continued conversationally. But resistance requires energy, heat, life. Cold preserves, but it also makes you vulnerable when warmth is offered. I watched in horror as the pages of Elias's journal began turning by themselves, stopping on a detailed drawing of a ritual circle, the same one from the town's founding documents but modified, altered, inverted. The ritual works both ways, the thing said, somehow knowing exactly what I was seeing. To close or open, Elias opened the way because his curiosity was stronger than his fear. Yours is too. I can sense it. You want to know what exists beyond the thin places of the world. To my horror, the bookcase I'd pushed against the door began sliding away, pushed by invisible force. I lunged for it, trying to hold it in place, but my strength was nothing against what pulled from the other side. The door cracked, frost spreading through the fracturing wood like veins of ice. Through the widening gaps, I caught glimpses of what waited. My uncle's face, but wrong, his features fluid and shifting slightly, his eyes enormous black pools that reflected nothing. The window behind me exploded inward suddenly, sending glass shards across the room. The frigid night air rushed in, bringing with it the whispers, now deafening, and the smell of old earth and decay. They poured in from all sides, figures like people but not people, their movements jerky or too fluid, their faces familiar yet wrong. Townsfolk I'd met briefly, hikers reported missing over the years, and others I didn't recognize but who wore their stolen faces with the same uncanny incorrectness. The thing wearing Elias stepped through the splintered door, smiling with too many teeth. "The collector comes," it said, "and it has waited so long for someone like you, with the sight and the hunger to see beyond. Your uncle was merely the key. You are the vessel it truly wants." The figures surrounded me, reaching with two long fingers. Behind them, through the broken window, I saw movement in the forest, something vast shifting between the trees, a darkness deeper than the night. "What is the collector?" I managed to ask, backing against the wall. The thing wearing Elias tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Not what? Who? The one who was here first, before your kind walked upright. The one who taught us to wear your forms. The one who collects experiences, memories, sensations, faces." Through the broken window, trees were falling in the forest, something clearing a path toward the cabin. The air grew so cold it burned my lungs. "Please," I whispered, though I didn't know what I was begging for. "It's already too late," Not Elias said gently. "It was too late the moment you read your uncle's journal, the moment you saw the faces in the frost. Curiosity is an invitation to our kind. And now..." Chapter 7. The Escape. What happened next seems impossible. A desperate hallucination of a mind at its breaking point. The front window of the cabin exploded inward, and through it came Cassie, wielding what looked like an antique flare gun. She fired it directly into the chest of the thing wearing my uncle's face. It erupted in blue-white flame, screeching in a voice no human throat could produce. The other entities recoiled from the light and heat, their forms seeming to waver and distort. "Run!" Cassie screamed, grabbing my arm. "They can't stand heat and light. The barrier ritual. I found the original version." We burst through the front door into the frigid night, racing for her truck idling in the driveway. Behind us, the thing that wasn't Elias staggered onto the porch, still burning with unnatural fire, its features melting and reforming as it screamed. "How did you know?" I gasped as we sped down the dirt road, the cabin receding in the rearview mirror. "I didn't answer my phone because I was already driving here," she said, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "After I saw your uncle in town, I knew they'd make their move tonight. The old records, the complete ones. I found them hidden in the library's foundation during renovations last month. She nodded toward a weathered leather folder on the seat between us. The real ritual, not the corrupted version your uncle used. It doesn't just close the barrier, it sends them back. All of them. But it can only be performed by blood relations of those they've taken. That's why it wanted me, I realized. Not just curiosity. My blood connection to Elias. Cassie nodded grimly. The collector doesn't just want to wear us like the others do. It consumes identities, lineages. With you, it could have accessed your entire family line. Something landed heavily on the roof of the truck, denting the metal inward. Long, frost-covered fingers began curling around the driver's side window. The truck swerved wildly as Cassie fought for control. I grabbed the flare gun from where she'd dropped it and rolled down my window. The thing on the roof had too many limbs, its face a patchwork of different human features stitched grotesquely together. I fired the flare directly into what might have been its chest, and it fell away shrieking, a comet of blue fire tumbling into the darkness behind us. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the roar of the engine and wind. "The center of the hollow," Cassie replied, her face grim in the dashboard light. "Where the barrier is thinnest. That's where the ritual has to be performed." The truck's radio switched on by itself, scanning rapidly through stations before settling on static and whispers. The same voices from the frost. "You cannot undo what has begun," a voice said through the static, deeper and more ancient than the others. The door stands open. The collector comes. The truck's engine died suddenly, leaving us coasting to a stop in the middle of the road. Ahead, the forest loomed, darker than the surrounding night. Frost Hollow. "We have to go on foot," Cassie said, grabbing the leather folder and a backpack from behind the seat. "The center isn't far. There's a clearing with standing stones. The original settlers found them there." She handed me a flashlight, its beam weak against the absolute darkness of the forest. "Stay close. Don't trust anything you see or hear unless it comes from me. And whatever happens, you have to complete the ritual. You're the only one who can." We entered Frost Hollow together, each step taking us deeper into a cold that seemed to leach the very life from my bones. Around us the forest was unnaturally silent. No insects, no animals, not even the sound of wind in the branches. But the whispers grew, coming from everywhere and nowhere. And as our flashlight beams swept across the trees, I caught glimpses of faces watching us, pressed against tree trunks, forming in patches of frost on the ground, floating in the mist of our breath. "There," Cassie whispered, pointing ahead. "The clearing." Beyond the trees stood a perfect circle of standing stones, ancient and weathered, their surfaces covered in spiraling patterns of frost. In the center of the circle, something dark waited, a figure too tall, too thin, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt the eye. "The bloodline comes," it said, its voice like stone grinding against stone. As was foretold, as was invited. From between the trees stepped the townsfolk, or what wore their shapes. My uncle Elias among them, his body partly charred but still moving, his face rippling like water. "The collector welcomes you," they said in unison, voices overlapping in perfect synchronization. "The collector has waited for one who could see beyond the veil." "The ritual," Cassie hissed, pressing the leather folder into my hands. "Now, before it's too late." Chapter 8. The Ritual. With trembling hands, I opened the ancient folder. Inside were documents so old the paper felt like it might crumble, detailed instructions written in faded ink, diagrams of the stone circle, and words in a language I'd never seen but somehow understood. "Begin," Cassie urged, positioning herself between me and the approaching entities. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." From her backpack, she produced what looked like handmade devices, glass vials attached to small propane torches, makeshift flamethrowers. She ignited one, creating a barrier of heat and light that made the approaching figures hiss and recoil. "Start reading," she shouted. "Your blood, your voice, that's what closes the door." I turned to the ritual text, forcing myself to focus, despite the chaos erupting around me. The words were written in English, but interspersed with symbols and passages in that strange language. The one I'd heard in the whispers. The one that resonated in my bones. As I began to read aloud, my voice seemed to change. Deepening, resonating, each word hanging visible in the frigid air as frost before dissipating. The ground beneath the stone circle began to vibrate subtly. The entities surrounding us writhed in apparent pain, their borrowed forms becoming less stable, features melting and reforming rapidly. Only the tall figure in the center remained unmoved, the collector watching with eyes like black holes in the fabric of reality. A cry from Cassie drew my attention. One of the entities had flanked her, grabbing her arm with fingers like icicles. Where it touched, her skin instantly frosted over, turning blue-white. She swung her flame toward it, driving it back, but I could see the damage done. Her arm hung limp at her side, the flesh necrotized by supernatural cold. "Finish it!" she screamed as more entities closed in. "Don't stop for anything!" I forced my attention back to the ritual, reading faster now, feeling power building with each word. The air in the circle began to shimmer like heat waves, despite the killing cold. "Your resistance is meaningless," the collector said, its voice now inside my head, bypassing my ears entirely. "This ritual was corrupted long ago. We made sure of it. What you read now will only open the way further." Doubt crept into my mind like frost across glass. What if Cassie had found the wrong version? What if this was exactly what they wanted? The whispers intensified, promising knowledge, power, understanding beyond human limits. "Don't listen," Cassie shouted, her voice weakening. "It lies, that's how it works, making you doubt yourself." 3 entities converged on her at once, overwhelming her defenses. I saw her disappear beneath their writhing forms, her flame extinguished. In that moment, something broke inside me. Grief, rage, and a profound certainty that I would not let these things take anyone else. I continued the ritual, no longer reading but reciting from memory, the words flowing as if I'd known them all my life. The wind whipped into a cyclone around the stone circle. The frost patterns on the standing stones began to glow with pale blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the words I spoke. "Enough!" The collector's voice shattered the night like breaking ice. It moved toward me with impossible speed, its form shifting and bulging as if multiple bodies were trying to emerge from within it. I spoke the final words of the ritual just as the collector reached for me with hands like twisted branches. The standing stones thrummed with energy, the spiral patterns blazing now with light that cut through the darkness like knives. Something tore in the air itself, a vertical rift opening between 2 of the standing stones, revealing a swirling void of absolute cold and distant, alien stars. The tear in reality pulled at the entities, their stolen forms stretching toward it. One by one, they lost cohesion, the human forms they'd stolen sloughing away like melting ice to reveal glimpses of their true nature, things of frost and darkness and hunger, ancient beyond understanding. "This changes nothing," the collector's voice fractured and multiplied, speaking from a dozen mouths at once. "The barrier weakens with each generation. We have waited eons. We will wait again." The vortex intensified, pulling the collector backward despite its resistance. As it struggled, I saw its form dissolve partially, revealing something my mind couldn't properly process. Geometries that shouldn't exist, a vastness contained impossibly in human proportions. With a sound like the earth itself groaning in pain, the rift sealed shut, taking with it the collector and every entity that had worn a human face. The ritual circle fell silent, the glowing patterns fading from the stones. For a long moment I stood trembling in the sudden stillness, unable to believe it was over. Then I remembered. "Cassie!" I rushed to where I'd seen her fall, dreading what I might find. She was alive, barely, unconscious, her skin deathly pale, the arm touched by the entity blackened with frostbite. But breathing. Human. I called emergency services, giving our location as best I could determine. While waiting, I studied the ritual documents more carefully, realizing the final section contained warnings and instructions I hadn't reached. The barrier would hold for another generation, but would require renewal again at the next thin time. And most disturbing of all, those taken by the entities wouldn't return. Their forms, their identities had been consumed entirely. My uncle was truly gone, had been from the moment something else wore his face. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. Cassie survived, though doctors had to amputate her frost-damaged arm. The medical staff had never seen frostbite progress so rapidly or severely, especially in March when temperatures had been unseasonably mild according to their records. They attributed it to some rare medical condition, unable to process the truth. "They won't remember any of it," Cassie told me when I visited her recovery room. "The town never does. That's part of the cycle, a kind of protective amnesia. By next winter, they'll have created rational explanations for everything." "But we'll remember," I said, the weight of that knowledge already heavy on my shoulders. She nodded grimly. "Someone has to prepare for next time." She gave me copies of all the documents she'd found, including detailed notes on the ritual and its timing. "The barrier will weaken again in 27 years. That's how long we have to prepare." "I'm selling the cabin," I told her, "going back to the city." She gave me a look of understanding mingled with disappointment. "Running won't help. They found your uncle in Boston halfway across the country. Once you've seen them, they can find you wherever you go." "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked, fear creeping back despite the sunlight streaming through the hospital window. "Learn," she said simply. "Study what I've given you. Find others who've encountered them. They're out there hiding like us. And when the time comes, be ready to strengthen the barrier again." I left Milford Creek a week later, once Cassie was stable enough to be transferred to a specialized hospital. The town already seemed to be forgetting. People who had warned me away now smiled and asked about my research project, as if our previous conversations had never happened. My uncle's cabin sold quickly to a developer who planned to tear it down for vacation properties. I didn't warn them about what lay beyond in the hollow. What would be the point? The barrier was strong again, would remain so for decades. As my train pulled away from the small town station, I stared out at the distant line of trees marking Frost Hollow. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something tall and thin moving between the trunks watching the train depart. The window beside me frosted over suddenly, despite the warm spring day. And in that frost, a face pressed through, not threatening, simply observing. Beneath it, words formed in the ice. "Until next time." By the time I called the conductor, the frost had melted completely, leaving no evidence of what I'd seen. They attributed my panic to trauma from my accident in the woods, the story the town had collectively created to explain the events at the stone circle. Back in my city apartment, I tried to return to normal life. I finished my novel, though I changed it from fiction to a speculative folklore study of thin places and entities that exist beyond human perception. It was published to modest acclaim in academic circles, dismissed as creative mythology by the mainstream. I stay in touch with Cassie. She started a digital archive, collecting accounts from across the country of similar phenomena, places where barriers have thinned, where things wear human faces but aren't quite right. We've connected with others who've had encounters, forming a loose network of watchers and warners. Sometimes on the coldest nights, I still see faces in the frost on my windows, still hear whispers in a language I shouldn't understand. The collector was right about one thing: once you've seen beyond the veil, you can never truly unsee it. 25 years have passed since that night in Frost Hollow. The date of the next thinning approaches. I've spent decades preparing, studying, gathering allies. When the time comes, I'll return to that stone circle, not running from what waits beyond, but ready to face it. Because the most terrifying truth is this: the barrier isn't just keeping them out, it's keeping something in, something that was here long before us, something that sees our world, our reality, as we might see a comfortable coat on a freezing night, something to wear, to inhabit, to take as its own. And it's patient, so patient. I know because I dream of it still. The collector, watching from behind countless borrowed eyes, waiting for the barrier to thin once more, waiting for its chance to finish what it started with my bloodline. If you're hearing this account, then you've been chosen too. You can see the faces in the frost now, can't you? You can hear the whispers. And when winter comes, when the first frost spreads across your windows, you'll know they've found you too. This has been The Faces in Frost Hollow Forest from the OBSCURALORE Vault. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps keep these dark tales flowing. Leave a comment below with your own encounters with thin places or entities beyond understanding. Until next time, remember, not all faces watching from the darkness were ever truly human, and some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. Sleep well, if you can.